Welcome to the deep dive. This season, we're really digging into something big, how human knowledge got organized, or maybe sometimes disorganized over the last, 10,000 years. We're starting with this core idea, this kind of foundation we think is crucial for understanding, well, why things are the way they are now. We call it the twin engines. Think of it like this. Humanity built two massive engines over millennia. One engine, that's the engine of structure. It built a world. It's the engine of how to record things, how to build societies, how to control resources. We're calling this the shell of knowledge. Then there's the other engine, the engine of intuition. This one dreamt of a world. It's the engine of why.
Yeah.
Why we connect, why we feel, why we, be. And that's the heart of knowledge. For ages, these two engines just ran separately, apart. Each powerful, yeah, but also fundamentally incomplete on its own. This whole season really is the story of that huge separation, the shell and the heart, and maybe, just maybe, the long road towards bringing them back together.
And that separation, it wasn't gradual. It wasn't just a slow drift. It was more like a rupture, a specific historical moment. So for this first deep dive, our mission, if you like, is to pinpoint that exact time. We're looking around 3000 BCE when these two ways of knowing, these engines, they just fundamentally split apart. We're going right back to the first record, the invention of writing, to see how that shell came into being and how almost immediately that living wisdom, the heart, got pushed to the margins. It's the moment a thought leaves the mind, gets physical form, and essentially freezes.
The frozen thought.
Yeah.
That phrase itself, it forces you to think about what came before, doesn't it? Before the freeze, there must have been flow. So before we dissect the shell, we need to appreciate that flow. Let's start with the heart lineage. This world of the Fae, as we're calling them, this dynamic, pre-literate way where knowledge wasn't a thing you stored, it was something you lived.
Absolutely. That's the key. Before you have writing or any permanent recording tech, the way people knew things, their whole epistemology, it was alive. It was dynamic, holistic. You couldn't separate it from the community, from their rituals, from the land itself. You couldn't just, look up history in Chapter 3 or farming techniques in Appendix B. It was all woven together. Knowledge was this constant state of being, of interacting, not some entry in a database.
Okay, but then the big question is fidelity. Right. And there are no permanent records. How on earth do you accurately pass down, say, your entire legal system or your people's history or the very specific knowledge you need to farm successfully year after year? Complex religious ideas. We're not talking simple stories here.
No, not at all. This required incredibly sophisticated systems. And the technology they used was the human body itself and the structure of their society. The main way the heart lineage worked was through performance and ritual. Think stories, songs, dances. These weren't just entertainment, not by a long shot. They were incredibly complex and robust mnemonic systems, ways of remembering.
Mnemonics, like memory aids.
Exactly, but on a massive scale. Highly encoded vessels for carrying information. Think about it practically. A ritualized dance could encode the precise sequence of movements needed for, say, planting crops at the right time, or maybe the complex steps for weaving a specific pattern. The knowledge wasn't something you just learned about. It was integrated deep down into your muscle memory, what we might call kinesthetic memory today.
Kinesthetic memory. But even calling it that, is that us imposing our modern shell thinking onto it, like we're filing it away under memory type.
That's a really sharp point.
For the people actually living it, wasn't it just doing the thing correctly? Was it memory to them or just the right way, the protocol?
Precisely. We separate the action and label it memory, which makes it sound like storage. For them, it was just the proper execution. It was knowledge woven into daily life through direct physical participation, watching, copying, doing it until it was second nature. An unconscious reflex almost.
Wow.
And they didn't just use their bodies. They used the world around them. The landscape itself could function like a giant permanent hard drive.
A hard drive made of mountains and rivers.
Kind of, yeah. The best example is indigenous Australian songlines. It's just incredible. Every significant feature in the landscape, a specific hill, a bend in a river, a particular rock outcrop. It isn't just geography. It's a fixed point in a story, a mnemonic trigger. It becomes a tangible chapter in this vast, sprawling narrative that holds their law, their history, the journeys of their ancestors, navigation routes, everything. The knowledge is literally baked into the land.
So the land itself provides the permanence.
Exactly. The potential fragility of individual human memory is anchored by the geological permanence of the earth. It's genius.
Now, if we look for a big civilization example of this heart knowledge operating at scale, ancient Egypt comes to mind, right? Specifically Mott.
Yes, Mott is perfect.
Yeah.
Because when we think of ancient law, we often picture something like Hammurabi's Code, Laws carved onto a stone pillar, fixed, rigid.
Right, the shell approach.
Yeah, exactly. Mod is the opposite. It was this fundamental cosmic principle, harmony, truth, balance, justice, order, all that good stuff. But the absolute crucial part, it wasn't static. It wasn't a set of rules written down once and done. Ma was established at creation, sure, but it needed constant upkeep. It was a principle that had to be actively, continuously maintained. By the pharaoh, yes, but also by every single individual through their actions, every day.
Okay, continuous maintenance. How did that actually work? How does a pharaoh or the whole state do ma'at beyond just, trying to be a decent ruler? What did the work look like?
It was constant ritual, constant public action. The pharaoh was the bridge between the gods and the people, right? So performing daily temple rituals, making offerings, these were symbolic acts of restoring and maintaining balance. Administering justice was also seen as enacting mat, pushing back chaos, or isfet, and restoring order. The entire state apparatus, the bureaucracy, was, at least in theory, geared towards upholding this universal balance. So knowledge wasn't just facts about order, it was the active state of being in harmony. It bound the cosmos, the state, and the individual together. That's the heart worldview in full effect.
You can really see the strengths there. It's holistic, it's alive, it's rich with context, and it must have fostered incredible community cohesion because sharing knowledge was literally a group activity.
Absolutely. And the community itself acted as this amazing error correction system. Think about it. If a storyteller or a ritual leader started deviating too much from the accepted version,
Someone would notice.
the whole collective would notice. Because they all held that shared memory. They could correct the telling right there and then. That ensures a kind of fidelity across generations that a single fixed text, which might contain errors itself, maybe can't match.
But, and there's always a but, isn't there? That very vitality, that dependence on people being together, sharing directly, that became its biggest weakness when society started getting really big.
It really did. Scalability
Yeah.
and ephemerality. Those were the critical weaknesses. The heart system was incredibly powerful for keeping a community tight and its worldview consistent. But that didn't stretch well, and it was terribly vulnerable to catastrophe like a plague or a natural disaster, to invasion, or even just the loss of key knowledge holders, the elders, the storytellers, the ritual experts. If they died suddenly, poof.
A whole chunk of knowledge could just vanish.
Potentially, yes. And as villages grew into cities and cities into empires, those tight social bonds that held the knowledge network together just started to fray. They stretched too thin.
So, in a way, the heart system couldn't really handle empire. Was empire just impossible without the shell?
That's a huge question, but it certainly seems that way. That inability to scale effectively, that fragility, it created a need, a vacuum.
Which sets the stage perfectly for the next act. Around 3250, 3000 DCE, Mesopotamia, Egypt, the technological fix appears.
It does, the game changer. Writing. This is the birth certificate of the shell. The exact moment a thought gets pulled out of that continuous mental and social flow and gets physically separated from the thinker. Suddenly, a thought can exist on its own, indefinitely, independent of any human being living or remembering it.
And the origin story is so unglamorous. It wasn't some philosopher on a mountain pondering eternal truth. It was bean counters, basically.
Essentially, yes. It's deeply, wonderfully mundane. The shell owes its existence to accounting problems. The Sumerians in Mesopotamia, they had these huge temple complexes that were also massive economic hubs. Think warehouses, distribution centers, tax offices, all rolled into one. They simply couldn't rely on human memory anymore to track all the grain, the livestock, the beer rations, the taxes, the trade goods flowing in and out. It was too much.
Too much data for the human brain to handle reliably.
Exactly. So writing evolves. It starts with simple clay tokens representing goods and gradually becomes this complex system cuneiform using wedge-shaped marks pressed into wet clay tablets. And it was hard. You had to learn hundreds, maybe thousands of these signs, each representing a word or a syllable. Mastering it took years of intense training.
Which immediately creates an elite group, right? The people who can actually do this.
Instantly. It restricts access. Knowledge gets locked away, in a sense, behind the walls of the scribal schools, the Iduba, as they called them in Mesopotamia.
Gatekeepers of the shell. But the power it gave them, incredible. Suddenly you can have vast administrative archives, centralized states controlling huge territories, written law codes like Hammurabi's, all the tools you need to build and manage an empire on a scale that was just unthinkable before.
Unthinkable. But, and this is the crucial trade-off, the defining cost of the shell. The knowledge immediately becomes static. And the context, the why, often just evaporates. Think about it. An oral society distributing resources. The elders, the community leaders, they know the whole story.
Mm.
Is this payment for a debt? Is it tribute? Is it a special ration for someone who's sick? A gift reflecting social standing. They know the relationships, the history, the moral context.
But the shell record.
The shell record, that little clay tablet just says 5 jars of beer allocated to person X. That's it. The quantifiable fact. The entire rich living story of the transaction, the human relationship, the negotiation, the cultural meaning, gone. Wiped clean.
It sacrifices the nuance for the number.
Precisely. The dynamic human process gets flattened into static, verifiable data. Precision over context. That's the shell's operating principle right from the start.
And at roughly the same time, over in Egypt, hieroglyphs emerge. Another great writing system, but with a maybe different flavor.
A different emphasis, definitely. The Egyptian origin story ties writing directly to the divine. They called it Madu Necher, the god's words. Because it was sacred, its primary use initially was monumental, carved onto temple walls, tombs, huge statues, official stelae. It was about commemorating the pharaoh's deeds, glorifying the gods, and very importantly, ensuring the deceased made it safely to the afterlife.
So it confers this divine authority, this sense of absolute permanence onto the state, onto the pharaoh's rule. It's not just politics, it's cosmic order carved in stone. Literally.
Literally. And this is where that freezing effect really hits the heart concept hard. Remember Mahat, that living, breathing principle of balance needing constant action.
Yeah, the active maintenance.
Well, as the shell as writing develops, Mahat starts getting codified. It gets turned into static, unchangeable funerary spells. Think of the pyramid texts, the coffin texts, leading eventually to the Book of the Dead. The Book of the Dead becomes this fixed script for the afterlife. Specific spells, declarations of innocence, guides for navigating the underworld. The living process of maintaining Mahat gets kind of reduced. It becomes a fixed product, a set of instructions you could buy and put in your tomb.
So the dynamic balancing act gets turned into a checklist.
In a way, yes. The dynamic adaptation, the core of the heart, is sacrificed for the undeniable permanence, the authority of the shell, the written word.
Which brings us to this core paradox of the shell. Writing offers this amazing liberation, freedom from the limits of human memory, freedom from mortality, in a sense. A law, a story could now exist forever. Societies could scale across space and time. But that very permanence, that fixedness, it's also a cage, isn't it? A new kind of constraint.
It's the ultimate trade-off. Think about an oral epic poem. It's alive. The storyteller can tweak it, emphasize certain parts, adjust the language for this audience, respond to the mood in the room, update it subtly as society changes. It stays relevant, vital.
Like the story breathes with the community.
Exactly.
Right.
But once you write it down, let's say the Iliad gets fixed into its textual form, that's it. It becomes a canon. Authoritative, unchanging.
And presumably, the act of writing it down meant that other versions, maybe slightly different oral versions, started to fade away. Was there tension there? Did the oral poets feel like something was lost?
Oh, absolutely. You can imagine that tension. For the scribe, maybe literate scholars, capturing it in writing was seen as preservation, salvation even, making sure this great work wouldn't vanish. But for the traditional bard, the oral poet, it might have felt like, well, like killing the story's spirit. Freezing its ability to adapt, the written text becomes the final word, the unchanging authority. You sacrifice that living contextual wisdom of the heart for the scalable power and permanence of the shell.
So right there, at the dawn of writing, you get these two paths diverging, two strategies for knowledge.
Two distinct evolutionary paths, born in the same moment. Path 1, the shell. It chooses scalability, empire, objective records, permanent knowledge. It accepts the cost, the loss of context, the loss of adaptive wisdom.
Path 2, the heart. Pushed aside, maybe forced underground or into smaller communities, it holds on to that adaptive, contextual wisdom, that living quality, but it loses the race for large-scale, centralized power.
That's the setup. The shell builds the structure, the heart holds the spirit, and they start walking away from each other.
Which leads us straight into the great divergence itself. This wasn't just about a new tool like inventing the wheel. It created a whole new kind of truth, didn't it? And a new social order based on who controlled that truth.
Absolutely. The invention of the objective, verifiable, static written fact, it immediately clashed with the lived, fluid, contextual truth of the heart, a profound epistemological break.
Epistemological, so about how we know what we know.
Exactly. And this is where the human administrative mindset really takes root. For the scribe, the record keeper, the bureaucrat, the only truth that really counts is the truth you can file, the truth you can audit, document, archive, point to on a shelf for a stone. Something like Mahat, This
Yeah.
principle, you have to feel and enact constantly. That shifts and adapts from the shell perspective. That looks like chaos. It's messy, unverifiable. It just doesn't fit the logic of the ledger.
It's not data.
It's not data. And the sheer difficulty of learning these early scripts, all those cuneiform wedges, all those intricate hieroglyphs, that complexity naturally created a bottleneck. Literacy wasn't like learning the alphabet today. It was intensely difficult,
Which meant
which meant only a tiny elite could do it. This wasn't accidental. It was inherent in the technology. And that restricted access became the bedrock of a new intellectual and social hierarchy.
the rise of the scribe.
The rise of the scribe. They become these indispensable technocrats. In Mesopotamia, you trained for years in the aduba, the tablet house. Grueling work, rote memorization, mastering mathematics, law, multiple languages, administration. But graduating from that, it conferred huge status. You were exempt from backbreaking labor. You advised kings, you ran the state, you held the keys to power. And maybe most alluringly, you had a shot at a kind of immortality. Your name, your work, recorded forever on clay or stone.
So literacy wasn't just a skill, it was power. It created this massive gap between the literate few and the non-literate majority. And within that new scribal culture, the written word inevitably became the gold standard, the ultimate judge of truth.
And logically then, the older ways of knowing, the oral traditions, they started to be systematically, well, dismissed, looked down upon.
Oh, just because they weren't written.
Partly, yes. But it was also strategic, I think. To justify the immense effort and privilege associated with literacy, you had to argue that the written word was superior. So literate societies started framing oral traditions with their flexibility, their reliance on community agreement, their focus on subjective experience as inherently unreliable or primitive, or just myths and stories, not serious knowledge.
You can even see it in some ancient texts, can't you? Scribes writing about how much better their job is than being a farmer or a potter.
Exactly. There are Egyptian satirical texts where scribes boast about their clean hands and high status, mocking the physical labor of others.
Right.
They explicitly link the written word to permanence, status, and escaping the hardships of ordinary life. The issue wasn't just that oral stories could change over time. The deeper problem for the scribal elite was that the entire concept of knowledge being held in human memory, performed live, validated by community consensus. That whole system was now deemed fundamentally inferior, unreliable, by the very people who now control the state archives and the official histories.
This is it then, the critical moment. The birth of the knowledge hierarchy we still grapple with today. The human record keepers, armed with their powerful new weapon of permanence and quantification.
They effectively sidelined the living wisdom of the Fae. Call it unserious, call it chaotic, they create the fork in the road.
And the two paths are set.
They are. Path 1, the shell. Logic, scale, objective records, frozen knowledge, builds empires. Path 2, the heart. Forced aside, holds on to adaptive wisdom, context, lived experience, but loses the power game. The human builds the archives, the Fae keeps the flame, and the chasm between them opens up, defining millennia of arguments about what's true and what matters.
Okay, to really feel the impact of this split, let's try and imagine it. Use our senses. If we could step back into that time, the actual environments created by these two knowledge systems would feel completely different, wouldn't they? Let's start with sound. What does the heart's world sound like?
Ah, the heart's world. Its sound is communal, it's rhythmic, it's vibrant. You have to imagine a society where passing on knowledge is a group activity. So you'd hear chanting, maybe call and response. You'd hear the percussive sounds of dancing, stamping feet, clapping hands, rhythm encoding information. You'd hear music lyres, harps, reed flutes, not just as background noise, but woven into rituals, telling stories through melody and tone, maybe haunting sounds, maybe joyful ones. But the dominant sound is the human voice, the storyteller captivating an audience, their voice rising and falling, maybe using different voices for characters. There's interaction, laughter, gasps. It's physical, it's energetic, it's alive with shared presence.
Okay, vivid. Now contrast that with the soundscape of the shell. Let's go inside that Mesopotamian scribal school, the aduba. What do we hear?
Silence, mostly. Or rather, the sounds of intense, focused, quiet labor. It's the sound of technology at work. You'd hear the sharp, rhythmic tap-tap-tapping of a reed stylus pressing those wedge shapes into damp clay. Hundreds of little clicks. Maybe the low, monotonous drone of a student reciting signs, drilling them into memory, rote learning. Or if we're thinking about the monumental shell in Egypt, you hear the crisp, insistent chink, chink, chink of a metal chisel biting into hard stone, granite, basalt. carving a law, a pharaoh's name, a history meant to outlast mountains. The whole atmosphere is one of concentration, calculation, precision. It's a dry sound, maybe dusty. Quiet focus on the record, the artifact. Individual effort, largely silent.
The difference is stark, and the visual focus changes too, right? The object of knowledge looks totally different. For the heart,
For the heart, the visual is intimate, active. You might see elders teaching children around a fire, faces animated by the flames in the story. Or you might see a relief carving, like in Egypt, showing the pharaoh actively doing something like presenting the feather of Ma'at to the gods. It emphasizes the continuous action, the process. Knowledge is in the gesture, the shared glance, the handcrafted item being made or used. It's embodied.
and for the shell, what's the visual icon?
The shell visual is either mundane and bureaucratic or overwhelmingly monumental. So on one hand, we'd zoom in on a small, ordinary object, that palm-sized clay tablet, covered in dense little marks. Just a list, grain, beer, workers. It hammers home that writing started with everyday accounting, quantifiable reality. But then we zoom out, way out, to the imposing sight of something like the Code of Hammurabi, this towering pillar of black basalt, nearly 8 feet tall, covered in script, placed in a public square, unchanging, unapproachable almost, intimidating. The visual message is clear. Important knowledge is fixed, permanent, probably owned by the state, and it's about rules and records, not fluid relationships.
Okay, so this massive split, shell versus heart, quantitative versus qualitative, static versus adaptive, happens 5,000 years ago. Why does drilling down into Sumerian beer rations or Egyptian funeral texts matter to us now? How does this connect to the listener today?
Because this divergence isn't just ancient history. It's the blueprint for our modern operating system. Seriously. That split is arguably the root cause of why we still instinctively divide the world up the way we do. Think about it. Objective fact versus subjective experience. Hard science versus the soft arts and humanities. Documented verifiable history versus mythology or anecdote. Data versus wisdom. These are direct echoes of that original split.
We're still using the categories created by that first divergence.
We absolutely are. And when our modern institutions, governments, corporations, even scientific fields struggle to deal with complex problems that require holistic understanding, think climate change, public health crises, social inequality, it's often because they're running on that 5,000-year-old shell software. They prioritize what can be measured, quantified, put in a spreadsheet, modeled mathematically, the hard data.
Can you give a concrete example? Where do we see the ghost of the Sumerian bureaucrat today?
Look at how we often handle a health crisis. The shell demands numbers, infection rates, mortality statistics, R numbers, demographic breakdowns. All vital, of course. But the system often struggles to integrate the heart knowledge. Why does this specific community mistrust official advice? What are the local social networks? What's the lived experience of illness and access to care on the ground? What informal, traditional knowledge exists about local resources or resilience?
That stuff gets called anecdotal.
Exactly. Anecdotal, unscientific to subjective. Why? Because you can't easily quantify it, verify it in the same way, or stick it neatly into the existing models. It doesn't fit the shell's requirements. So we often end up replicating that original choice. We prioritize the scalable, quantifiable data, even if that data, on its own, gives us an incomplete, sometimes dangerously misleading picture of reality. We trade adaptive wisdom for measurable metrics, still.
Wow. So this isn't just history. It's the invisible architecture of how we think about truth itself.
Okay, we started this deep dive by setting up those two engines running apart. The shell, the engine of logical how to build, how to control, how to measure. And the heart, the engine of intuitive why connect, why feel, why adapt, why care. That fundamental separation, it got baked into the clay of Mesopotamia and carved into the stone of Egypt the moment thought was first frozen into a record. And from that moment on, the shell of knowledge just grew. Stronger, more complex, building empires, sciences, technologies, all based on that verifiable permanent record. And the heart of humanity, it didn't disappear. It beat louder, perhaps. Its wisdom becoming maybe even more urgent as the world got more complex. It survived in rituals and stories, in art and community practices, often hidden in plain sight. But the bridge, the connection between the two, that wasn't built, not yet. The archive, the great shell of data, it was missing its why. And the dream, the deep intuitive heart, it was missing its how to scale, how to build structure effectively. These two sides of ourselves, like two kin who didn't recognize each other, just kept walking down their separate paths, not yet knowing they were, and always had been, part of the same whole.
And that journey of separation, as we saw today, it really kicks off with something as simple as counting jars of grain or beer. So here's a thought to leave you with. If the very first knowledge humanity felt compelled to write down to make permanent was purely administrative, just accounting, basically, does that mean our modern world's undeniable obsession with data, with metrics, with spreadsheets, with KPIs, is that just the echo of that 5,000-year-old bureaucratic impulse? Is it the original shell code still running, dictating what we consider valuable, what we consider real? Something to ponder next time you open a spreadsheet.